Hello, we are Performance Anxiety. We analyse the film, television, theatre and comedy performances that everybody is talking about. I'm Alex Dale, and with me is my resident film expert,
Dr. Maren.
On this episode, Queen Cleopatra, starring Adele James as Cleopatra, Craig Russell as Mark Antony, John Partridge as Julius Caesar, and Deirdre Critchlow as Arsinoe, and produced, for the most part, by Jada Pinkett Smith. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Welcome to the show.
Are you ready to get into this?
The hot potato of hot potatoes?
Yes, the hottest of hot potatoes.
Yeah.
All right. What is this, Queen Cleopatra, and why do we want to talk about it?
Well, Cleopatra is the second series in Jada Pinkett Smith's adaptation of what she calls African Queens. So the first one came out earlier this year, and it was the story of Queen Njinga of Angola. And the second one has just come out, and about Queen Cleopatra, and it has caused quite an uproar.
Before even people have watched it.
Yeah, as soon as the trailer was released, people were up in arms about this.
So some of the reactions have been extraordinarily over the top. Let's see now. An Egyptian lawyer has filed a complaint that accuses African queens Cleopatra of violating media laws and aiming to erase the Egyptian identity. That's pretty full on. A top archaeologist insists Cleopatra was light-skinned, not black. So we're getting to the problem here. Why is this show causing so much controversy?
Well, the controversy of the show started when people saw that Jada Pinkett Smith cast a black woman as Cleopatra.
The woman in this case being Adele James.
Yeah, lovely actress.
I mean, we've barely scratched the surface of the amount of coverage this thing is getting. The fallout has been absolutely nuclear.
The absolute uproar that this has caused is
It's extraordinary.
And since we are talking about, the performances that everybody's talking about, we felt obliged to, not just watch it, but also comment on it.
So our question for this episode, I guess, is what's wrong with a black Cleopatra?
And the obvious answer is, of course, nothing, And I think we saw the show, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with Adele James portraying Cleopatra as a black woman. I think, and the show shows that in spite of itself.
All right. So there's some heavy claims there. Nice claims. I think we need to do a lot of laying down a lot of track, as they say in the biz, to explore these ideas. Let's get into it. What is this show, Queen Cleopatra? You mentioned it briefly. Tell us a bit more about it.
Well, it is the usual kind of what we call it, a sort of a docudrama. You have your historians, your talking heads being interviewed, telling the story of Cleopatra. And then you have intercut with this acted out scenes of what is being talked about. So, they talk about, then Cleopatra did this. And then we see Adele James acting out what's happening.
All right, so let's grasp the nettle. How do you think Adele James does in her role? What kind of performance does she give?
I thought it was quite an enjoyable interpretation of Cleopatra. She portrays this character with a lot of Cleopatra-ness, Yes, a kind of strength, seriousness, but also vulnerability. So it was kind of very nice to watch her be Cleopatra. She filled it with life, and she filled it with meaning that was missing from the historical accounts.
I agree for what it's worth. And I think that it was one of the criticisms that came from the Times was that it was badly written and hammy acting. I would take issue with that because I thought the acting was really nice.
Yeah.
And the writing was fairly bad. It was typical historical exposition nonsense that the actors really elevate through the some really nice performances across the board.
They make really good choices with the terrible text that they're giving. So as performers, you can really see that they have thought about the kind of situation that this character is in at the moment and given it some actual life. In juxtaposition to the sort of deadpan comments by the historians, they fill it with meaning.
That's nice. Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah,
From that
I think
point of view.
it drops off at the end a little bit when they introduce Octavian and he becomes a kind of really bizarre panto villain in the whole story. So it drops off a bit there, but I think the first 2 or 3 episodes were really, really well dramatized. There might be a bit of a problem with the directing, but the performances really were warm and illuminating.
As well acted as anything like this could be, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the interesting things worth mentioning in passing, and worth talking about for a second, is something that isn't discussed, is that as well as being black, Adele James is English, as is the rest of the cast. Now, these are some casting choices that Hollywood tends to make that tends to be not discussed. Do you think there's anything worth thinking about there, about why English actors?
I think it is far more important that the characters are cast as English than anything else. And I think when we talk about it a bit more, it becomes very clear. So the idea of English actors in a kind of American production always conveys a sense of aristocracy and class, something that is not found within a kind of the American sphere in the same way. So the English accent and this kind of bearing that English actors bring to the role gives it the royal gravitas that, only casting English people gives.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. So the casting of the actors being English is far more important ultimately, as we will see.
I think that's very true. It's easy from an English audience to not clock that, to not see the use of English actors to mean something, especially
Yes.
to stand for something.
Especially abroad, it stands for aristocracy and class thinking in terms of aristocracy and royalty. That's something that is not there in most other countries, especially America.
The famously egalitarian society.
Well, the idea of aristocracy
Yes.
seems to be kind of...
Well, they
yeah.
got rid of them. Now then, the bone of contention, as we've touched on, is the race of Cleopatra and the race of the actor Adele James and the conflict between the two. How does the show deal with Cleopatra's race?
So what happens at the beginning of the show, it's called African Queens, and Jada Pinkett Smith produces a whole series about African queens. So the very first historian of the show at the beginning, the first talking head, lovely eccentric historian called Dr. Shelley Haley. The first thing that she says is Cleopatra was black. Interestingly, the next talking head already takes this back and says, we don't know what she looked like.
All right.
Because, you don't know. First, the concept of race has not been invented then.
In the way that we would think of
Yeah,
it today.
exactly. And and because nobody actually knows, there is a kind of gap in knowledge about who Cleopatra's mother was. And we can fill it with any kind of imaginative fantasy that we want.
It gives license to historians or people with an agenda to come up with a counterfactual history, let's say.
Well, the argument goes, she was a Macedonian queen and therefore must have looked Greek.
For what it's worth.
Whatever that means,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. So I don't think we're interested. I think, yes, this is all true. I don't think we're particularly interested in that at this moment.
No.
The question I think in front of us now is, why is this show and the people involved in it interested in the idea of blackness, black queens? What does it mean to be black in the context of this work?
Well, very interestingly, so after they have then proclaimed that we don't know what color skin she had, we come back to Dr. Haley and she proclaims that although we don't know, what we can say, she is culturally black. That's how she explains the casting of Cleopatra as a black woman and the imagination of Cleopatra as a black woman, because she is seen by the public as culturally black.
All right. Now, this is a can of worms. What is meant by the term culturally black, do you think?
So as a response to the kind of uproar about the casting that happened, two academics wrote an article in the New York Times just last week explaining this concept of cultural blackness in the way Dr. Haley understands it, and they want to promote it. And Dr. Haley says in the program that what she means by it is that what she says is we claim as part of a culture and history that has known oppression and triumph, exploitation and survival. So the idea of cultural blackness is all of these things. So people who have known oppression, triumph, exploitation and survival are considered culturally black, or being adopted into the culturally black umbrella. And here we are already faced with the kind of really confused idea that this is, because according to their own definition and explanation, most of humanity is culturally black.
I mean, most of humanity has been oppressed up until 20th century.
Well, yes, we've all been subjects to a kind of oppressive system.
Yes.
Ironically, of course, those who are not oppressed are absolute monarchs, like Queen Cleopatra and Queen Njinga. So that would make them not culturally black. So we can already see that this is a very, very confused idea.
Does it play itself out anymore in this show? How does it work itself out?
It very interestingly does not matter in the show, the fact that she's culturally black or her blackness. You know, as soon as this premise was made, they get on with the show, so to speak, and it has no bearing.
Yes, it's never referred to again in any way.
Never referred to again. It has no bearing on either the historical or the dramatic play out of this whole show.
Yes, there's no reference made to her being black, and it informs the drama in no way at all.
Not at all. However, the way it works onto the show is in a different way, and that is because the concept itself is so, let's say, confused, it messes with the kind of dramaturgy of the show.
All right. Now, dramaturgy is one of these drama terms that you like. Tell us some more about what that means and the consequences.
In this context, it means the dramatic justifications for every scene of the show and the way we read it, and ultimately as an audience.
Thank you. That's very clear.
Okay. So what to explain this, you know, as I said, it's a kind of documentary drama thing, you know, the kind of usual thing when you watch a documentary. You have the talking heads, usually historians, pundits, people who are specialists in the subject, and they get interviewed. And then these historical facts and accounts are being juxtaposed to a little bit of drama, where actors play out the scene that's just been talked about. Yeah.
Nice.
So Cleopatra and Julius Caesar meet one another for the first time, and then we see the scene where the actors play this out. And so here we have two different ways of telling what happened. So we have an academic, factual, very dry truth, you know, about this happened in this order and this is what it means.
So this is a kind of E.H. Carr, what is history? Here are the facts laid out for you to interpret.
Yes. Or being nicely retold. Most of these pundits are quite fans of their own subjects, aren't they?
Yes.
On the other hand, you have actors acting out the scene, so to speak. So they're giving it an artistic interpretation of what is being given. So they let the script, let's say, run through.
Harsh but fair.
Let's say, run through their kind of artistic, subjective body and play out what is. So we arrive at a kind of different truth to what has happened.
Yeah.
You know, by having this scene shown to us in their artistic interpretation, in combination with the dry facts. So, and usually the idea is for the audience, you know, take these two different kind of ways of achieving the truth about what happened and make up your own mind. You synthesize this in your in the reading of and the watching of this program.
So it's a way of making meaning. the facts and the kind of individual subjectivity are kind of coming together, and you're creating partially that meaning, right?
Yeah, it's a form of telling a story. And usually it's not a problem in itself, because we, as an audience, know what to do. We listen to the historians and we watch the drama, and then we can make up our own head cinema, our own Kopfkino about what happened in the past. Yes? However, this program set out a premise at the beginning that told you how to watch this show.
As in, Cleopatra was black.
Yes. So this is the thing. This is how you have to watch this. This is the concept which you have to pay attention to, the idea of cultural blackness. And the audience is thwarted because, as we discovered, it has no bearings on what is actually happening. So we are constantly looking out for the instruction that we got at the beginning. You know, this is how you watch this. These are the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And these are not the rules of the game.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to then make our own juxtapositions about what
Yes.
we see. We're constantly on the lookout for, but what?
Yes.
This is what matters. This is supposed to matter somehow, and
Yes.
it doesn't.
No, I quite agree. So, it never really plays out in any meaningful way in anything you are told or seen.
Yeah, and it already is very evident because it is such a confused idea at the beginning. It cannot play out in the drama.
Yeah.
It has no actual. It's actually not true because it is a false premise.
Yes.
Ultimately.
There's no way you can play that out either
Yeah,
historically
exactly.
or dramatically.
Absolutely. So this foreclosure of the audience doing their own reading of the film, hampers our enjoyment. We're told this is how we have to watch this.
Yeah.
We cannot make up our own minds of this.
Yes.
And bam.
Any pleasure that we might get out of it is essentially ambiguous. We're not allowed to enjoy it, essentially. We can't, even if we wanted to.
Yeah, because the guarantee for our enjoyment, discovering the premise or following the premise, is not there. So it's absolutely futile for us to look for it. Because it's not there, we cannot enjoy this.
Now, the actress herself, Adele James, has admitted that her casting as a black woman in this role was a political choice rather than maybe an artistic one in the first place. And she also expected a certain degree of pushback, but maybe not to this extent. Now, the question, I think, is, what are those politics? Why was it a political choice? What is the politics that's been embodied in that choice?
Well, the politics behind it is the politics of identity, with its emphasis on cultural representation.
All right. Now, I have a rough idea of what you might think those things are. Can you tell us some more about those, what those things are?
Simply put, it is the idea that you have to rectify, historical wrongs of the underrepresentation of marginalized groups by specifically promoting the representation of these groups in the art and the performances and the productions that you do, in the cultural outputs that you produce.
Very succinct, thank you. Those are some heavy tasks. Do you think, this is a loaded question, obviously, do you think art is up to that task? What do you think art can do in that kind of position? Is it up to that task?
Well, here we are at this cultural moment in time that we're in, where we find that institutions, especially, are burdening all artistic output with this task. Art is seen as the kind of vehicle through which these policies and ideas should be realized. However, as we can see with Cleopatra, the problematic nature of these ideas and politics of identity and the contradictory and confused nature of it all are illuminated through the failure of the art, right?
Nice.
So because art works through this kind of subjective interpretation of something to create a new truth. It cannot by default, art cannot by default reframe ideological givens into something new. It's not what art does. And to make art be in service of that will fundamentally empty out any kind of art of its principal nature.
I'm going to paraphrase that back to you in my own unique, crass way, in my capacity as an interlocutor. Art has a specific quality that basically doesn't lend itself to this social purpose of rectifying social ills. Is that fair?
That is absolutely the point of it. Art by its nature is a formulation of new truths. So you cannot impose a kind of program onto it. It defies the nature of the thing itself.
Or work a program through it.
Absolutely. This is why, programs, films, theatre plays, anything that is not in the service of an artistic process itself, but has a kind of ideology put on top of it, is unsatisfactory and unsatisfying for an audience, because we as an audience are not allowed to enjoy the outcome of art, this new thing.
Yeah.
Because we're already being told this is how you should understand something. And if we're being told from the beginning this is how you should understand something, we cannot enjoy the process of watching or enjoying art as such.
Now, our initial question was, what's wrong with a black Cleopatra? And we said very clearly at the beginning, nothing. And this show, in fact, in spite of itself, shows that to be the case. So let's just revisit that answer in the light of everything we've said and explain our answer more deeply.
Obviously, we try and find the enjoyment that is still there. And the enjoyment is in the performance, because that is being left alone by the kind of premise at the beginning. So Adele James plays through, she transcends this ideological burden that is put on the dramatic element of this documentary.
So we can still enjoy identifying with her as a performer, and we still feel that kind of common connection.
Yeah, so she shines through not because of the ideology, but despite the ideology. This is why she's a great Cleopatra, and this is why we should watch it and enjoy her performance as Cleopatra.
If you are so inclined, yes.
Absolutely.
I agree. I think she does a great job, and I really liked watching her. Yeah, she's very nice. There is an extra question that's worth thinking about for a moment, is what is it about Cleopatra that is so interesting? Why do people want to tell this story?
Well, it's very interesting because, in the pipeline is more Cleopatras. More Cleopatras coming at us.
Get out, Tal.
I had to do this.
I don't blame you.
There's a big production with Denis Villeneuve, who directed Dune. He's making a big movie about Cleopatra.
Do we know who the Cleopatra is?
It's rumored to be Zendaya.
Oh, all right.
I know. And there's a movie prepared with Gal Gadot as Queen Cleopatra. So we're having lots of Cleopatras thrown at us in the future. Already there are protests against any of the castings that are
inevitably, of course.
Inevitably. So this is not going to leave us, which is a shame, because I love Zendaya and I love Gal Gadot, and they're both gonna
You already start to tell what those stories, those versions of the Cleopatra story, are going to be like purely from the casting of those two actresses, right?
Exactly. So I love Zendaya. So her Cleopatra is going to be this innocent child.
Becoming a woman.
But also quite cheeky, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so
sassy.
Sassy Zendaya.
Yeah.
And then Gal Gadot is, sex bomb Cleopatra.
Seductress.
Manipulator of history.
Yes.
So I don't know why I did that.
Well, interestingly as well, she was a Cleopatra in the Death on the Nile, the terrible Death on the Nile.
Yeah,
we
but
both hated.
That was like the best part of it.
Yes.
So, we're having Cleopatras, different kinds of Cleopatras in the future. So what is it about Cleopatra? And I think it is the same desire to portray her that was the desire of this documentary. The idea that she is, in modern parlance, a survivor.
She's a queen, but with KW. Queen, yes, queen.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a survivor.
She's a survivor. She has to thrive in a world of adversity, especially a world of men.
She's resourceful. She can manipulate people.
She gets things done.
Yeah. She's ruthless, but she's crafty, but she's still somehow sympathetic.
Yeah, we all want to be her, in some way. Even the men, we all have a bit of Cleopatra. What's very interesting about this, it seems to speak to a moment in time that we're in which we all experience the burden of history very individually through a kind of subjective experience of adversity rather than as a collective.
So we're all individual survivors in some way.
Yeah, this is why I think Cleopatra is having a moment, and a moment around this very meaning.
So we talked very briefly in our Oscar special about this. The films in the immediate future are going to be about dealing with the difficulties of life. Do you think this is Cleopatra's feeding into that?
Absolutely. I think it's very of the moment. And I think we're going to talk about it more and more in the future.
Thanks for listening to Performance Anxiety. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe. It means a lot to us and it all helps the show. Till next time, bye.